Now, each parameter module, we can go ahead and I can use the mouse and just mouse over, and you notice that that's switching the lights here. I can also use the buttons on the slider buttons to change the modules that we're going to map our controls to. Let's first explore the amplitude. I'm going to turn down the harmonicity down to 0 and modulation down to 0. So all we're hearing is the sine tone or whatever the carrier wave is set to. So now we have a sine tone playing. And let's go back to amplitude and change the depth. And you can see that if the depth is 0, we hear nothing. So this should give you a good idea of what depth does for pretty much all the parameters that have the same basic function. With the LFO, we can add a tremolo effect. And we can hear that with the depth at 0, the volume is oscillating from 0 to 1. We can notice that a little bit better if we change our LFO shape to a pulse wave. And if we change the range to the depth to 1, then that is going to change the minimum, or actually the center, of what the LFO controls. And let's see. And finally, we have the envelope control, which is a fixed length automation curve down here. And we'll need the depth up to hear the effect of that, because the depth is multiplied by that envelope. And you can use that to, here I'll turn the LFO off, and you can hear the effect of that. As the amplitude now follows that envelope. And if we want, we can change the duration with the duration knob or duration parameter, and that changes it globally, you'll notice. So it affects all of them. If you want to change just the duration of just one of these envelopes, you'll have to use the mouse. Now, this envelope here is, of course, different from the ADSR at the bottom, which controls the amplitude envelope in response to key presses. So what I'll do is I'll go to our amplitude and reset that envelope. So now we just have basic, and we can hear what the ADSR does. We can control the ADSR using the F3 key to map these top right knobs to the ADSR parameters. And let's try a basic example of a quick attack versus a slow gradual attack. So now we can emulate different types of instruments. There's also another very important one is the sustain rate and decay rate. And of course release, which determines how long the note is held after you let go of the key. A lot of different instruments have, follow this basic model from, percussion to pianos to strings. You can emulate sort of those effects with different ADSRs. So now that we have the basics of the ADSR and amplitude envelope, we can mess around with some of the other parameters and make something cool. So we'll go back to amplitude. I want to set up a little tremolo effect. Carrier shift, we can change the frequency of the carrier and shift that. And if we want to add some modulation, And I would show you pan, but I'm recording this in mono, so it's really not too worthwhile to show that to you, but same sort of thing. Now, when we get to the filter, we notice that it has some additional controls at the top. When we select this module, all 12 knobs at the top left are dedicated to the filter, and whereas normally in another module, the top 4 knobs will control the carrier wave, modulation wave, and duration, and of course gain. But when we go to the filter, now we control the mix, the resonance, the low range, and the high range of the filter. And now we can apply all sorts of great tricks, like, for example, an LFO. And we can, of course, add a modulation envelope. And sweep it manually if we want. And of course, we can change the carrier to something noisier if we really want to hear the effects of the filter. And the key here is, of course, you can still play with the knobs while the note is going on and add effects and change the sound as you would if this were just sort of a standalone synthesizer. Now, to finish off the sound design, we have a couple of effects in reverb and in the delay. So I'm just going to go ahead and reset this sound. So we're back at something a little bit more normal. So we can hear the effects of the reverb. And let's see. And we can highlight that. And I'm going to change the ADSR to something a little bit less mushy. Change the size. So we can make it sound like we're in a big hall. Or just completely dry. And then finally we have the stereo multi-tap delay down here. And that's controlled with a mix of the sliders. And let me use the right channel. It's much more fun in stereo, even though this is plenty cool. And we can change the times by, again, using our F3 shift. And I can make this time on this slider very short. So it's pretty much a flange effect. And let's quiet that. And I can change the time on any of these to something that we want to work with. Second note triplets. And these are all feedback protected, so no matter what the mix is between these 4 taps, it's not going to completely explode on you. So you can have a lot of fun just mixing them all and getting different effects. And then one other very important note is the presets. We can store any of our settings into a preset for recall later. Let's see, what else do we have here? As you can see, I have an affinity for just making crazy synthesizer sounds. And then the very final point is that the crossfader can be used for velocity, since these are not velocity sensitive pads. But you may want to get that effect, so the crossfader is a nice approximation for that. So that pretty much covers everything in the FM sound, in our OhmSound synthesizer application. And of course the source code is all available to you, and if you are a MaxMSP user you can tear it apart and use pieces of it and figure out how I do all of the context sensitive mapping, and so maybe some of the sonic tricks will, for example the wave morphing. I really encourage you to get into it and try to make some of your own instruments if you work with MaxMSP. And that's about it. Happy sound making, and thanks for listening.